Dear Minister Maas, dear Minister Lajčák, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, dear guests, it is my great pleasure to welcome you all on behalf of Körber Foundation to this year's Berlin Foreign Policy Forum. In 2011, Körber-Stiftung and the Federal Foreign Office joined forces to establish this new format in order to discuss on an annual basis German and European foreign policy in Berlin. On the occasion of the 60th anniversary of the Federal Foreign Office, of the re-establishment of the Federal Foreign Office, I should say, our idea was to strengthen the foreign policy discourse in Germany and to emphasize that foreign policy is something that affects everybody and each of us. To this end, we not only assembled a group of foreign policy experts and officials here at this forum, but also we paid a lot of emphasis to reaching out to young leaders here in the forum and also reaching out to the wider German and international public. 7 years later, we can look back at a long list of inspiring moments, impressive speakers, and thought-provoking discussions. 45,000 viewers followed our live stream, our internet live stream last year, and that was really a new record high for this forum. Yet in these 7 years, the world has also changed significantly. Fundamental beliefs and guiding lines are in flux. Who would have thought that we would discuss the consequences of an American retreat from the liberal world order the US had helped building after 1945? That there would be a lively debate about the wisdom or the necessity of strategic independence from our most important ally, the United States, or even that we would have a debate about whether Germany needs nuclear weapons here in Berlin. Given the manifold international challenges, the only choice for Europe seems to be unite or decline, the theme of this year's Berlin Foreign Policy Forum. Yet unite is easier to say or in rhetoric than it is in reality. Nationalism and populism are on the rise, and for the first time in EU history, a member state is about to leave the Union. Against this background, Körber Foundation has decided to place a special emphasis on the value of Europe as a special topic for our activities. We, as many others, are concerned that almost 30 years after the fall of the Iron Curtain and almost 15 years after EU's Eastern enlargement, Europe is threatened with a new split between Western and Central Eastern European member states. Our annual survey on German attitudes towards foreign policy, conducted in September this year, produced some interesting results in that regard. Asked whether the EU's Eastern enlargement in 2004 was the right decision, a surprising 46% of Germans say no, it was not. About the same number said yes, it was the right decision. We also asked the Germans whether Germany should work towards sanctioning EU member states that violate fundamental EU values such as the rule of law, for example by cutting resources from the EU budget. Here, a clear majority of 74% are in favor of sanctions, 22% against it. As our results show, continuing the path of integration and growing together, which began in 1989, remains a big challenge for all Europeans. And we are particularly pleased, Minister Lajčák, that later today you will discuss with us the question of how holding Europe together. At a time when Europe is faced with many internal divisions, we are also witnessing severe challenges on the global stage to the rules-based international order. For Germany, as a middle power, multilateral cooperation, safeguarding multilateralism is particularly important. And that is why we have decided to become one of the 6 founding members of the Paris Peace Forum that was inaugurated 2 weeks ago by President Macron, Chancellor Merkel, and United Nations Secretary General Guterres in the presence of 65 heads of state and governments. Yet the German population, when it comes to international engagement, remains rather skeptical. 55% prefer restraint in international crisis, 41% more involvement. Last year's result were very similar, 52% versus 43%, and all in all, these numbers have remained the same since we started these regular surveys 4 years ago. Last point, the rift in transatlantic relations has a strong effect on the Germans' view of the relationship. We asked both sides of the Atlantic in cooperation with the Pew Research Center about the state of US-German relations. 73% of Germans consider the relationship as somewhat bad or very bad, a clear deterioration compared to 56% last year. Yet 70% of Americans consider the relation as somewhat good or very good, so the Americans are much more positive about the relationship than the Germans. And thank you to the Pew Research Center for the good cooperation in conducting this survey. You can find all survey results in the second edition of the Berlin Pulse, our new guide to German foreign policy. Political leaders like, for example, Polish Prime Minister Mateusz Morawiecki and IMF Managing Director Christine Lagarde outline their expectations on German foreign policy. I'm glad that some of the contributors of the Berlin Pulse, among them you, Minister Maas, are here with us today. We will discuss today the future of the liberal order, how we can balance cooperation and conflict in our relations with Russia or China, regional power conflicts in the Middle East, as well as disinformation, cybersecurity, and artificial intelligence during our breakout sessions. All of you and everybody following our live stream are most welcome to contribute your questions using the hashtag #BerlinFPF, #BerlinFPF. Jana Fix, who is our program director for the Berlin Foreign Policy Forum, will lead you through the day. Dear Minister Maas, we are honored and pleased that you continue the good tradition of opening the Berlin Foreign Policy Forum as the fourth minister in succession. And I would like to thank you and the Foreign Office for the support and the excellent cooperation in hosting this forum. We're looking forward to your remarks. Minister, you have the floor. Thank you very much.
Dear colleague, dear Miroslav, I'm very happy to see you this morning here, and I would like to see you more often in the future as a colleague. Dear Mr. Röttgen, ladies and gentlemen, members of parliament, ladies and gentlemen. Unite or Decline is the title of this year's forum and is I believe, very apt in its accentuation. Either we manage to strengthen our cohesion in Europe, or, and this is not an understatement, as we risk the future of this unique peace project. So let me name 4 very brief points, without much ado, where I see the most important levers and challenges at the moment. Firstly, Europe must assert itself in a geopolitical environment characterized by increasingly fierce competition between major powers. So, great power competition, this is the buzzword. The arenas of this competition are becoming increasingly clear. On the one hand, economically, between the USA and China, with a potentially, as we've just seen, escalating trade dispute. Secondly, the strategic competition between the USA and Russia, and meanwhile also between the USA and China. And this new form of the great power competition is already dominating the discussions in Washington, and meanwhile not just in Washington. The race for technological dominance fuels this competition further especially and currently in the armaments sector. It's clear that we in Europe have the most to lose, both due to the trade conflict between the USA and China, as well as the strategic exacerbation of relation between the US on the one hand and Russia and China on the other hand. The uncertainty about the continued existence of the INF Treaty, which ended the nuclear deployment race in the medium-range area between the USA and the former Soviet Union, is only one current example. Especially, we in Europe benefit from this treaty and therefore have a great interest that it will be respected also in the future. So the question of how we in Europe should position ourselves in this new competition between the major powers is central for all areas of foreign policy. So what means of influence do we have? What can we Europeans do for more trust and transparency, for multilateral solutions? So these are questions that you will discuss here at the Berlin Foreign Policy Forum. Ladies and gentlemen, it's clear. I believe that we in Europe do not strive for equidistance to the emerging power poles. The transatlantic partnership is and remains deeply rooted and, especially for us Germans, a strategic necessity. And this is what we have to see as well, and have to react to this, what we perceive. The American interest in Europe has diminished, and this not only since Donald Trump became president. As Europeans, as Germans, we must therefore invest more in this partnership in order to make it more equitable and more balanced, and I also say we are prepared to do so. So, Europe must not be crushed between the new poles of power. Europe United describes the way forward that we have adopted. Europe's international ability to influence the world stands and falls with its unity. Thus, and this is my second point, we come out for a sovereign Europe. So the European Union has to be able to act in this complex geopolitical constellation in the foreign as well as security policy, as well as in trade policy and the development of future technologies. The fact that European unity enables progress to be made, especially in foreign and security policy in particular, is something I would like to illustrate with 3 examples. A few days ago, we added a civilian pillar to the permanent structured cooperation in the defense sector, which was adopted last year at the initiative of Germany. So here in Berlin, we want to establish a European competence center to prepare civilian experts for crisis operations. And this way, we transfer what we in Germany call the networked approach to the European level. So, a few weeks ago, together with the Commission and the EEAS, we adopted an EU connectivity strategy with Asia. Germany was a driving force right from the start. So we want to promote and bundle investments as sustainable infrastructure and connections between Europe and Asia, also as a political investment in our closer and wider neighborhood. And there's another example, which is the nuclear agreement with Iran, where the unity of the Europeans still ensures, even today, that this agreement continues to exist. Ladies and gentlemen, European unity is dependent, and this is my third point, on us overcoming the cracks in our own ranks. We Germans, who've experienced the division of Europe into East and West in our own country, must not allow a new division. So that is why we've expanded our lines of dialogue towards Central and Eastern Europe and will continue to do so. With you, dear Miroslav, I have agreed an in-depth dialogue with our governments, similarly with the Czech government. With Warsaw, we are pursuing a common Polish-German agenda that focuses on European future issues. And we also coordinate closely with the Visegrad Group on European as well as foreign policy issues going beyond that range. So the central question here is how we want to deal with our eastern neighbors outside the EU. Such a European Ostpolitik, stressing the word European, can only be shaped together with our partners in Central and Eastern Europe. And this will only be successful in this way. And to this end, we must succeed in developing within the European Union a culture of joint, coordinated action in Eastern Europe. Only then will a common policy towards our neighbors outside the European Union be possible in the first place. And this is particularly true of Russia. The aim must be for Russia to once again respect international rules and not violate the territorial sovereignty of its neighbors. And to achieve this, however, we need two things: clear principles, and principles that are also voiced, but also a genuine dialogue on our common security in Europe. And just how important it is, we see with the events in the Azov Sea. So Russia and the Ukraine were called upon to also to show restraint, and the Normandy format should be used to bring about a solution together. We have to do everything for the de-escalation of the situation to prevent that from this conflict a more aggravated crisis may develop for the security of Europe. So, but it's not only this connection, it is important also to cooperate closely with France, and that's the fourth point. President Macron has recently emphatically confirmed his offer for a genuine Franco-German breakthrough in the German Bundestag. So when he speaks of France's love for Germany, it's a moment when we too should ask ourselves whether our relationship with France must not overcome the traditional categories of friendship between peoples. In May, admittedly a little less poetic than President Macron, I spoke of a radical closing of ranks between Germany and France. We mean the same. A first important step was our common reform proposals on economic and monetary union, and as well as on foreign and security policy. So now it is a matter of translating these agreements into European decisions. And I believe, despite all criticism, we're on the right track. The same applies to the final steps in the new negotiations for a new Elysee Treaty. It contains the promise of tackling all key challenges together in the future, and thus sets the direction for the years to come, if not for the decades to come. And in doing so, we expressly place Franco-German friendship at the service of Europe by offering all EU partners the opportunity to participate in our cooperation. Because our common goal is to strengthen cohesion in Europe. And this in a situation where there's new challenges that we are facing inside as well as outside Europe. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll only come closer to the goal of a more cohesive Europe, Europe united if you so will, if we do not become too concerned with ourselves. And I say this also with regard to the political discussion in Germany, which sometimes loses sight of the global upheavals we're currently experiencing. In 2019, this will be a decisive year in and for Europe. Brexit is scheduled for the end of March 2019. The elections of the new European Parliament in May are expected to polarize the political debate in Europe enormously. The disinformation campaign regarding migration pact is only a glimpse of what is in store. And at the end of the year, a new commission in Brussels will take over the helm. And it will be our task as foreign and security policy makers to direct political energy towards our foreign and security policy issues. At the end of the day, for who, if not the European Union? has what it takes to stabilize the multilateral order. And multilateralism is actually in our very DNA. So this means that we must intensify our cooperation with like-minded people also outside Europe. I have spoken of alliances for multilateralism that we've initiated with countries such as Japan, Canada, and Australia. And our aim is to defend existing institutions, so we're already this far, and where necessary to open up, and above all, where necessary to reform them, starting with the United Nations, through the development banks to the WTO. We should also advocate closer cooperation in those areas that are not yet sufficiently regulated. Say, I'm thinking, for example, of the subject of cyberspace or the development of ever-new high-tech weapons that could make our current arms control obsolete. So, in view of the state of the world, sitting back and staying out is certainly not an option. Recline and decline don't just sound similar. Dear Mr. Paulsen, I'm therefore grateful to the Körber Foundation for having created a forum here in Berlin to discuss solutions in foreign and European policy. It is more necessary than ever a forum that involves, above all, younger participants and does not lose sight of our common goal. And that is to work for the cohesion and further growing together of Europe. Thank you very much.
So.
Good morning, Excellencies, dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, many thanks to the Körber-Stiftung for this invitation. There are not many places better positioned to discuss the European unity and division than Berlin. For 28 years, a wall not far from here divided the city and the country, the continent and the world. Who knows better than Berliners the pain of division and the joy of unity? For many years, the word wall symbolized divisions, darkness, decline. And then people said enough. Walls don't belong to Europe. Walls don't belong to the world. Walls belong to the past. And so we tore them down. We built a union with no borders, no walls. And it grew and prospered, united in a rules-based order. But it's 2018, and we hear the word wall dominating the news again. We are losing one of our members. Voices advocating nationalism and divisions are gaining strength. Truth and expertise are losing value. Instead of removing the remaining barriers to our integration, we are building new ones. So today, I'll talk about the walls of 2018. And I have three messages I want to share with you. First, we are hearing the wall presented as a sign of strength. But wall is a sign of weakness. While in the past the walls protected people from the outside threats, in 2018, any sense of protection walls provide is just an illusion. Walls don't protect us. They separate us, and they blind us, prevent us to see the real problem. We must realize that building walls does not make problems disappear. It's a placebo, temporary, unsustainable placebo. Unless we want to live in a medieval world again, we should forget about walls. Today, the real strength lies in cooperation, courage, and ambition. We can overcome challenges only with patience, willingness to understand, and skill to deal with them. Not by building walls to cement our positions, but by solving the real issues. I know it's hard. Sometimes it seems impossible to understand, simply because the history of this continent was a very diverse one. We come from different circumstances, speak different languages, and different generations remember different stories. Like the other day, my daughter saw Ein Kessel Buntes on YouTube, and she asked me what was wrong with us. I said nothing, but then I actually watched the video. I didn't have much to say. Different generations also tell different stories. In 2018, we cannot fully appreciate the courage of those who tore down the walls within the European Union and created four freedoms. We got used to it. And now, it seems as if many were ready to build the walls again. We cannot let that happen. We cannot let our divisions blind us to a simple fact. Europe has never been more free, prosperous, and secure than today, when we form a community of values. Yet, this is definitely not an easy time for our community. Why? Why is one of our members leaving? Why is Euroscepticism on the rise and far-right parties are gaining strength? Why? When we have all the pragmatic arguments advocating integration. I would answer that it is because for the past 9 years, the headlines on EU affairs were dominated by one word: crisis. We went from the financial crisis of 2009 to migration crisis of 2015 to Brexit and the crisis of trust of today. And we survived them, but we did not really resolve them. Take these past 2 years. We have dedicated most of our political time and efforts and employed our best diplomats to define the relationship with the one of us who has decided to leave. We spoke about the internal agendas rather than about specific solutions for our citizens. When they do not feel the relevant contributions, when they do not feel that our union is strong and has people in its focus, they start to doubt. And somehow, we are not successful in dissolving and dismissing this doubt. Instead, while we stumble, others are stepping in, offering false promises and unviable alternatives. We face those narratives, but we are so preoccupied with defending existing structures and institutions, we have almost no time left to build them up with our own projects. What will history books write about us, about our achievements? Will this generation tear apart what the fathers of the European integration have built? To quote my daughter, what's wrong with us? I think it is the walls. They prevent us from expanding our vision. Walls separate people from within, rather than protect them from the outside. Why? Because threats don't respect the walls. And that's my second point today. No wall can stop threats of this century. There is a spectrum of issues truly global in their nature. Climate change and how it affects the most vulnerable societies. Poverty and hunger and how they fuel migration. Inequality and how it triggers radicalization and terrorism. They pass through any wall. The only way to stop them is to work together. Cooperation, multilateralism, compromise. No European nation, not Slovakia, not even Germany, is large and strong enough to withstand these pressures alone. If we want to face these challenges, or quite honestly, if we want to survive, we need a strong union as a global actor in political affairs. Divided Europe is not only weak, but it's also upsetting geopolitical balance. Global atmosphere today is characterized by a race of new powers and by leadership vacuums. We need Europe capable to fill them. We need Europe positioned alongside the United States, China, Russia, and other emerging players, not squeezed between them. Only in this role can Europe do its job, not only for itself, but also for equilibrium of international power. Divided Europe helps no one in Europe. Division is never the end state of affairs. Remember the old Latin divide et impera. Divisions is always followed by domination, and people know it, friends as well as adversaries. The only domination we should accept for Europe is domination of law, justice, equality, freedom, and democracy. Effective protection against the threats of the 21st century is cooperation. Any wall is a limit. Which brings me to my third point. Walls divide us, but not every wall is made of bricks. And that's the third point I want to make today. Sometimes we build walls in our minds. We build walls of ignorance, arrogance, and stereotypes. And these are much harder to tear down. It's been 14 years since the big enlargement, and we need to quit the mentality of the old and new. Just as in the European Union, also in Germany, 14 years after unification, we still heard voices echoing divisions, East and West, rich and poor. These mental walls cause so much damage to the Union. Just remember how Brexit started. We need to leave these old patterns of thinking. We are a union with a single market, and the lines that divide us are not geographical, neither economic. The real division now are between those who believe in Europe and those who don't. Those who tell the truth based on facts and those who don't. Those willing to cooperate and those who are not. Those seeking understanding and others who just don't care. And I believe that all of us here in this room do care and do want to understand. And the only way to understand is to talk and to listen. The real dialogue is the real way how to tear down false stereotypes, old prejudices, and walls inside us. We don't need a wrecking ball. We need to work together, treat each other as equals and with respect, and play by the rules we created ourselves. Ladies and gentlemen, to conclude, let me come back to the beginning, to the title of this event, Unite or Decline, Europe's Future in an Unruly World. Let's dissect its three key words: unite, decline, unruly. First, unite. Europe's prosperity and security, it's linked to its unity. We must constantly explain to our citizens that those who challenge the Union, in fact, endanger people's prosperity and security. Alternatives they offer are unsustainable and dangerous. That's why false prophets could not outline their visions, because they don't have any. What they offer is decline, the second word. Europe's prosperity and security is also linked to freedom and human rights. Have you heard any of these false prophets, along with their ideas of nationalism, isolation, and protectionism, or as they like to say, real sovereignty? Have you heard them speaking about freedom and human rights? Freedom needs champions. Human rights need champions. Without them, our human dignity will decline. The third word is unruly. The complex institution, such as the European Union, needs rules. The complex organism, such as human being, needs rules. Unruly is an inevitable decline of any form. Politicians and diplomats bear special responsibility. We negotiate rules. People naturally expect us to be the first to observe them. We have to be first line of defense of a rules-based world. When we close our eyes to our own faults and mistakes, when talking about them becomes politically incorrect, it doesn't make them disappear. It doesn't mean that others don't see them, especially those to whom we so often preach about our values. If this is the case, decline starts with us. Dear friends, before I leave the podium, I want to acknowledge the role of Germany in advocating for an inclusive Europe, reconciliation, cooperation, and compromise, for being the force to pull together, not apart, no matter the political cost. This has been crucial in the past, and this will be crucial for the future. We welcome the continued leadership of Germany. Europe needs it. I thank you for your attention.